If we focus on just events, so what is if you look at the overall most popular events, we have B2, Kira, 4, which is Stu. I was expecting pretty much the same emails. So we have the same topic, 3, 2, Kira. Why is it popular? Any guesses? Alright, so one of the things that I asked the question that I'm not interested in. So one is, why are there fewer people altogether? Fewer also being interested. So why is it between 8 and 12% every year? And secondly, why are we going to fewer competitions? And why are we doing fewer events in the next term? Alright, part two. So I think we took out of curiosity and answers. And you have to come for your employee who feel like he's still in the heat. So here's an exhibit, a lot of reading of there's all these other things that we need to answer these questions. And you know that I took that picture because that's my policy at the very top of the organization. Alright, so let's start with this information. So this is an article from over 100 years ago. It's called Almost Psychological Medicine Efficiency of Women in Sleep Condition. So I know that is kind of shocking because this information was very rampant in the late 1800s. And so this is one article for everybody. So the main argument is that on average, male gains are slightly more than heavier than female gains. Therefore, and this is right. That's the entire basis of this article. The rest is just a very annoying bit. Alright, so this is some national information from modern research. So here's a quote from a book by an educator. So this is from Dr. Nicholas. She's an education researcher, and she visited a lot of classrooms in the UK and the US. So here's her books, and I have no problem. So she wrote 90% of girls chose understanding as the most important aspect of learning mathematics, compared to only 65% of boys. The rest of the boys said that memorization of rules was the most important. So when I read this, I think that I'm not a teacher, but what I saw this book, I found out that was cheating. Because the way the author tells you is just through memorization. So they put it on a tutorial, they'll tell us straight out, here's what you do, okay, so you have to puzzle, and write it in, and all the tests, and it's done. So I thought that was good at that as a video ago. Here's another book on a similar topic. For many tasks, grade indicates studies show that women use the most advanced areas of the brain, whereas men in the same task use more primitive areas of the brain. So that's a similar idea of how organization strategy. This has some different time before we go into more automated strategies, where women tend to go the opposite way. Alright, so Another quote from Rosie. So boys can navigate overestimate their abilities, while girls are more likely to underestimate their abilities. This is an author of one Alright, so now I'll close today and to think about this quote a little bit. So depending on your own disappointment of gender, you may have focused on the first half, or you may have focused on the second half. And there is will be focused on the second half. So I'm going to tell you actual content for this quote. So it's in a section of I talk about how lawyers tend to do dangerous things and why they do that, especially under peer pressure. But in context, this quote also talks about how emotions and lack of confidence for boys can overestimate even balanced abilities. So a couple years ago, this article came out. I found it in the Facebook group. You can guess who it's on. It's called "Do Women Pick Up Competing More Easily? Evidence for Speech Groups." So what they did here is they looked at university graphics and they looked at the results of competitors who did very, and they compared those who did those who did a secondary degree rather than teaching peers. And there's a theory was that cultures were less likely to keep being after the instructor constitution on music. But we actually found that was not true over time. And it is not true in those who were in North America. So they did find that this is a lot more common in countries where there is a demographic labor market. In other words, depending on how these are treated in general, in countries that's also funded whether or not they advance in competitions in those countries. Alright, so that's it for that section. So now I'm going to give some shout outs to something that WCA is doing really well regarding academic inclusion. Alright, so here's a regulation from 2014. I'm going to read it. 831. When the judge believes the competitor is ready, he asks, ready? The competitor must be ready to start the attempt within 1 minute of being called, else he forfeits an attempt to DNS at the discretion of the judge. So why do I pick this other than because it's a common regulation? So back in 2014 earlier, the regulations refer to anyone in regulations, competitors, administrators, officials as even. And this course was changed in 2015 onwards. So usually is actually at the very top of the regulations. Basically, readability rather than have to write strictly throughout the entire thing, which is really. And if you look at the number one, it actually said, under this, we all propose to competitors. We've actually thought that out but it actually is switched in data. So here's an example of that. This is WCA Live. This is what it looks like when you watch academic programs through a spot. Notice that they use they and everywhere competitor. So it says, you have to move this person and replace them with other qualified competitor. And this is everywhere on the WCA website and all the documents, and it's been looked at since 2015. I think it's well. That's something that's quite progressive over time, and it's been going on now. But the WCA did that starting in 2015. Another thing that we do well is not having only two gender options, but we did this really well. The author and our in and other. And this is all the information you find in the WCA graphics. And I'm pretty sure that people who chose other try to figure out what is the reasons the option to other. And so I think what's called this one is for people who are non-binary, who don't identify as she's going to get so the common and non-fire other facilities. And I did see some people who said they actually did not non-fire care for the well because they're tired of getting supplements and it's putting them out of the work. So here's an idea that we can do with. So what I did look like this instead. So this end is not very much so it is that if you want to basically like a little bit of time, have the option to them, and also set up a practice data. And then notice that in the database, we took the vendors who are autonomous, and it says the vendors are there. But also the vendors who don't know and it's just null, and it's just not there. And how do you use two different options that they solve a lot of problems with different things and consistent data in the database? Okay, so I want to talk to you a lot about vendors, and we all very experts. So this is a page where you can see different things, sort of and also this little way. So here at the top, we're going to do we are also very grateful that we are not official. This is just for fun. It's just for official. It's just something we do for fun. But it's not actually treating anybody harmful. Meanwhile, next two steps. This is for everyone that so let me read what is said on this page. So first of all, we have the business involved in business. This is just kind of cross-checking. You might just be nice because you do the drivers. The WSS state works in this kind of situation. It's kind of cross-checking because of good state. Here's what it says. All standards must be in the division of their biological gender, specifically male and female transgender partners, may not be female versions, and female to male transgender partners may not be in male versions. Part of my language. This is bullshit. So this is just made and there's not much pretending. And we done that the statement. And it basically said that the coding is more fair to female vendors because they compete under fair conditions, and this is a very inconsistent process. I don't know what I think the conclusion means because to me it means that you are essentially keeping the most part people as part of your decision. And all it says is it's really transparent factors. It provides a place where it's all about welcome, fair, and also allows for online cases to conflict with all the different. So you're fair. It's up to stay in conflict. So each do not become status as a image. So one more about transmissivity in general, but really helpful. It's quite helpful not to mention it too much. But basically, it's a lot of further arguments for why we just support transmissivity, and there are a lot of issues surrounding dental skills. Okay, so one thing that is connected to well. So if you want to keep the paper printer on your cloud, it's a very easy process. And it does not require IT to do what you're posting. So here's the way to do this. You can either reach out to the results team directly, or you can reach out to Canada. It does not have to be your local benefit. So all you have to do is ensure that your email address after your real estate account. You say what your location, you want to and you make a request for the results team directly. If you choose to go to the results team directly, it requires a certain amount of features. I have there's an organization that already occurs. So this is intention versus impact. So intention is what you meant to say, whereas impact is how others perceive what you said and did. This is very important when it comes to equity and how we figure out opportunities. Okay, so when you look for so the organizer wants to prevent any good competition. It's really important to keep in mind that we'll have competitors who could be able to research and find places that are very accessible. So another thing is when you do content study, make sure you do that information directly on Competition website. So instead of directly saying enter this door, take here, and on the left. Please also include how to identify an elevator program or any particular testimony. Another thing to make sure that the brand has a good influencers, and let's talk about things to build confidence. They provide many things to control, to yourself. It's a little bit of a exactly not a great term, but it's still a good option. It's install. It's not a new idea. We all have this in our homes. Every project in your home is really good. It's not the revolutionary idea. And you want to have a tool for the washer talk to do directions to transformers and multiple washers. So we're talking about these washers. There's a lot of misinformation about these, and a lot of these send theories that aren't functional and are spreading so they think that it is that's correct. It allows people to use washers as so sometimes this is directly on washing and holidays. Sometimes it's based on another stage is wrong or not. So there are some fixes that for people to use washers if you go back and absolutely because it's going to force anyone to use washers and I don't know that experience me. I'm not sure that it's the same as everyone. So a lot of people do that for themselves. Is a really good point. Alright, I talked a lot about the concept. So I feel like that this is just kind of a small competition that you're doing but I'm talking a lot of people talking about competitions. And there are some good things that we go about this to share that information. Alright, so I have some general advice that I want to talk. So first, when you see, let's say an coaching, you see the adults going to kids or a girl, who you think that is going to be. Most of the time we're trying to go away, but you don't want to make that something. Because I do that, it's kind of a message that's on the and also you will always be later. celebrating people who want to that and make them happy. So